guys, today we're going to talk about horse identification, and of course I know this horse as Val, and you'll meet my other two horses here. You may not be familiar with their names and what they look like, and so I want to go over different ways that you can identify horses, okay? So Val is, we'll first start, Val is a mare, okay? That means a female horse, and because she's an adult horse over the age of 3, we call her mare versus a filly. So a filly is a younger horse. We usually call a young female a filly until they get to the point where we're breaking them out and saddle training them, which is usually around 2 to 3 years of age, okay? Now, Val is not only a mare, but we also refer to as a brood mare because she's had, historically, most all of her life, a foal on her side, even while she was showing. So first time that we were introduced to her, she had a baby in her show barn, in her stall, waiting for her when she got done riding, okay? And so that baby on her side, we'd refer to her as a foal. So if we're not gender specific, if it was a male baby, we would call it a colt, okay? And then we'll talk about as it gets older, the different names that we go through. But again, generic name we'd call, again, this is brood mare, and then her baby on the side's a foal. When we finally take that foal away, if we're not gender specific, we would call it a weanling, and that usually we'll call them a weanling up and through that first 6 months, okay? That's usually when we're going to go ahead, at 6 months, we're going to go ahead and wean them, and we'll start calling them a weanling, okay? So as soon as we wean them away around 6 months of age, sometimes a little older, we'll call them a weanling. And then again, after it's been about a year old, that's usually when we start getting them prepped and ready to train them and do a lot of things. We're going to distinguish them from a weanling, we'll start calling them a yearling. Again, if we want to be gender specific, we would say if it's a male horse, a colt, female horse, a filly at that young, non-adult age, okay? You say, well, how do we identify a female versus a male, okay? So fairly easy. It's not like, let's say, rabbits, for example, and some of the other companion animals that you might find that are difficult to go ahead and check. Actually, our females, in our quarter horse industry, and she is a quarter horse, are quite stocky and broad and muscular here, but she has a very feminine face. But we can also look underneath the tail, and she's got a vulva, okay? So her vulva here, and then her anus up here. So she's got a vulva here, okay? We can also look underneath and see she's got udders. Again, they're fairly well developed in here, so we can tell the difference with that, okay? So now if we move over to our other horse, this is a gelding, okay? And this is an adult male horse, so as soon as they get that 2-3-year-olds, instead of colt, we'll call them either a gelding or a stallion. Why is this a gelding? He has been what we call castrated. So if I look underneath, he is missing his testicles, okay? He's got a sheath, but he doesn't have his testicles. And of course, if you look behind his anus, he's missing that vulva, okay? So easy way to check, and that's a simple, a lot of times people don't want to ask, but if you're a non-horse person, you would want to know, okay? So if he had his testicles still, if he hadn't been castrated, we would call him a stallion. And then again, like I said, since it has been castrated, we call him a gelding. And usually we'll castrate them around 6 months of age up to about a year. So once those testicles drop and they're evident, we'll go ahead and do it. It's a fairly minor procedure. They can even do it while they're standing and do a local sedation, or they may lay them down too on top of it. So it just really kind of depends on your veterinarian. As you notice, that both of these horses have a golden body with what we call a flaxen, so a yellow, almost white color mane and tail. These are, as you can see on the saddle, Palominos, okay? Palomino is a horse registry, plus it's a color. So it's a color breed. They have to not only have the coloration, so you saw between my gelding a little darker versus my lighter mare here, so you'll see a lot of variations, but that golden body with a little bit lighter mane and tail. Doesn't have to be super light, and we'll look at my pony here in a minute. They do have to have the quarter horse bloodlines. Quarter horse is the #1 breed in Mississippi and the #1 breed in the United States, meaning there's that many of them. So that mostly what you see out there, a lot of them are. They've got that muscular body. They're not really tall, but they're very stocky. They're very wide, okay? A lot of muscle. Overall, very low head carriage, as you can see. Usually a big hindquarters also, you notice. As I mentioned, they're not really tall. So if we were going to measure a horse and we'd measure from the withers, this is the withers here, on down. So I put my measuring stick here, on down. She's right at about 15 hands, okay? And you say, well, what's hands, okay? 1 hand equals 4 inches, okay? But in the horse industry, we use hands, okay? Anything below 14.2, we typically will talk about as being a pony, and we'll show you an example of a pony. So you will have quarter horses that kind of realm around that pony height or a little bit higher. Some that have, quarter horse will have some thoroughbred bloodlines in them, so anything higher than that, they're going to go ahead and they may have some thoroughbred bloodlines, okay? So you may see some of that. So, but this is not uncommon, this 15 hands there, okay? So she's also registered, as mentioned before, with the Palomino Association. She's also registered with the Pinto Association. Pinto is a color breed. There are also, a lot of y'all, if you're familiar with paints, with the big white patches and the solid patches. She's in the solid breeding division of the Pinto, meaning she doesn't have the color to match up with that. So with that solid breeding, she can still compete with other horses that are solid. In fact, my gelding too is also with the Pinto. So she is triple registered, but she is in that solid coloring for the Pinto. Pinto registry is a lot more flexibility than paints. We used to have a paint horse that was registered in 4 registry, including paints. For paints, they actually have to have both the quarter horse and thoroughbred, which she has, but at some point in her line, she had to have a horse that actually had that paint coloring, that big white patches and what. Pinto has a little more flexibility, so she didn't have that in her bloodlines, but she still could. She's got the quarter horse and thoroughbred, so Pinto accepts her in that, okay? Now, if you have a paint horse, if you see those big white patches in, let's say, another color, like a Palomino or Bay or whatnot, it can't be called a paint unless it has that quarter horse and thoroughbred bloodlines or a combination of it. If we have a combination of quarter horse and thoroughbred, we often call that an appendix, okay? So there's just some variations that you see here, okay? So we'll move on over and talk about our pony. As I mentioned before, our gelding has more of a dark color Palomino coloring, so that's something you'll see. Ignore, he's got a little bad part about lighter made horses, whether it's the paint or even the Palomino. They get into this orange mud, and look at in Mississippi, it stains their color. I joke he's trying to be a red horse, a sorrel, rather than a Palomino. But finally, we'll go over here to our pony. So she too is registered with the Palomino Association, and you know she looks much more like a quarter horse. And as I mentioned before, you can have some quarter horses that fall in that pony height. If you look at her, she's exactly right on 14.2, so she's, you know, at that pony height. She actually, interesting enough, is not actually quarter horse. She's got quarter horse bloodlines, but she's actually an Appaloosa. Okay, and again, you say, well, I don't see the Appaloosa coloring on her. And again, she's in a different division, not the normal division. She does have what we call striped hooves. So if you notice, it's not a solid black, but it's striped. And she has what you call speckled skin. So if you were to wet her down, you'd see she had white skin with little black little speckles on it, okay? You can really tell if you look at her vulva, she's got the little speckles in there. Other things you'll see, along with on Appaloosa, they'll have maybe like a blanket Appaloosa, they'll have that white hair over and then spots in there. They'll have different coat patterns in your paints. But the other thing, they'll have what we call white sclera around the eyes, which will have some white around the eyes in there, okay? So she's not kind of your typical Appaloosa, kind of like the Pintos I showed you. So you will see variations. Don't be surprised if you go to Appaloosa show and see that they don't have, all of them have that really flashy Appaloosa coloring there. She does have the quarter horse bloodlines in her, but then she also has back in her Appaloosa. You say, well, what's different the Appaloosa from like a paint or a quarter horse or whatnot? They allow thoroughbreds, they allow quarter horse, but they also allow some Arabian in there. So somewhere deep down in there, there's probably a little bit of Arabian. But then on the quarter horse side, she has what we call the bloodlines Hollywood Dunnet. So she's reining bred, and so she does look very much like a quarter horse, okay? Interesting enough, so we'll talk about her markings. So along with the Palomino, you may find where they'll have leg markings. Like you can see, She's got white coming past her in here. We call those stockings. If it was white just covering up to her fetlocks, we call that socks. If it was white down below here, we call it a pastern. And white just above her foot here, we call that a cornet. So again, you'll have both leg markings and facial markings that you can look at here. You'll see on her, she's got, you would say, oh, this is a blaze, but if you notice it comes really thin through here, it's actually a star, strip, snip combination. So this thinness coming in kind of breaks up what we would consider a blaze. A blaze would be wide all the way across. And so sometimes you'll find a little white underneath their nose. They may have a chin spot. If they got white covering an eye, it would be called a bald spot. White just by itself is a star. White just right here is a snip. If it's just a narrow stripe and nothing in between, it might be just a strip. So you can get variations on all those. None of that really affects that she still is a palomino. Now finally, so palomino is a cream dilution, so it lightens up the base color, which is typically that chestnut or sorrel coloration. She has something that's a little more interesting on her. If you notice across here, and we can actually see if we come right behind her, notice the dorsal stripe coming down the back. She's got what we call this dorsal stripe through here. We a lot of times we're calling these palominos what we call a Dunalino. So she's got that Dun genetics through here, okay? And that's not uncommon in Hollywood Dunnet bloodline. So you can see that Dun stripe coming down her back. Commonly you'll see more kind of a buckskin, a tan body with black mane and tails, and then that dorsal stripe. You may actually even see more of a chestnut or sorrel with the dorsal stripe. So you don't find as often those Dunalinos where they've got the actual palomino. So that's something, that dominant dorsal stripe down the back is what we refer to as a Dunalino. Okay, so that also makes her unique. So again, that's just some crash colors, different ways you can identify different horses, ways that you can do it besides just calling them by their name. Again, do your research. Really evaluate. A lot of these breed associations have very helpful guides, so you want to check into those too. So again, have fun learning more about different colors, different breeds, and you might find some really interesting facts about them.
Like the Pinto Association, the Palomino Association can have other breeds like the Arabian and the Mountain Pleasure Horse, as seen in these photos.